November 20th, 1944. A frozen road near Pfuffendorf, Germany. Through the periscope of his M36 tank destroyer, Sergeant Robert Early watched a Tiger tank materialize from behind the rubble of a farm building, its massive silhouette unmistakable even in the grey afternoon light. For months, American tank crews had learned to fear this shape. The Tiger's 88mm gun could destroy their Shermans from distances where return fire was futile. But Early's vehicle was different. Mounted in the open-topped turret behind him was a 90mm gun, a weapon German intelligence had failed to detect and German tankers had never encountered. In exactly 14 seconds, the crew of that Tiger would discover that American industrial capacity had produced something capable of challenging their supremacy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Tiger commander, peering through his optics, likely saw what appeared to be another American tank destroyer. Perhaps an M10 with its familiar 3-inch gun, a weapon his frontal armor could defeat at any reasonable range. German doctrine, refined through 3 years of combat, emphasized engaging American armor at maximum distance. The Tiger's advantages in armor protection and gun range made close engagement unnecessary and tactically wasteful. This Tiger crew followed that doctrine, halting at approximately 1,200 yards to acquire their target properly. It was a fatal miscalculation. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Early's gunner centered the crosshairs on the Tiger's hull, accounting for the distance and the slight wind. The 90mm gun fired with a distinctive crack that differed from the sharper report of the Sherman's 76mm. The armor-piercing round, traveling at over 2,800 feet per second, crossed the distance in less than 2 seconds. German crews had grown accustomed to watching American shells bounce off their frontal armor or shatter against it. This round did not bounce. The projectile struck the Tiger's lower hull, punching through 100mm of armor plate and detonating inside the crew compartment. The Tiger shuddered. Smoke began pouring from hatches, and within moments the crew was bailing out, abandoning a tank they had believed was invulnerable to frontal attack. This engagement, documented in after-action reports from the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, represented more than a tactical success. It marked the psychological collapse of German confidence in their armored superiority. For over 2 years, German heavy tank crews had operated under the certainty that American guns could not defeat them frontally. That certainty, built on experience and validated through hundreds of engagements, had sustained German morale through retreat, material shortages, and overwhelming enemy numbers. The M36 tank destroyer, nicknamed Jackson by post-war historians, though not during the war itself, had arrived in Europe only 2 months earlier. German intelligence had completely failed to detect its development and deployment. This failure would prove catastrophic not because the M36 was produced in overwhelming numbers, but because its mere existence shattered German assumptions about American industrial capabilities and tactical doctrine. The story of how American engineers created this weapon begins not on the battlefields of Europe, but in the testing grounds of Aberdeen, Maryland, and the factories of Detroit, where metallurgists and ordnance officers worked against time to solve a problem that threatened to undermine American armored operations. By early 1944, the United States Army faced a stark reality that military planners had failed to anticipate. The M4 Sherman tank, backbone of American armored divisions, was encountering German tanks it could not reliably defeat. The Panther, Germany's response to the Soviet T-34, combined a powerful 75mm high-velocity gun with 80mm of frontal armor sloped at 55 degrees, creating an effective thickness that proved nearly impenetrable to American tank guns at combat ranges. The Tiger, even more formidable, mounted an 88mm gun behind 100mm of frontal armor. This gun could destroy a Sherman at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, well beyond the effective range of American return fire. German tank commanders had learned to exploit this advantage ruthlessly, positioning their tanks at maximum range and destroying American armor before it could close to threatening distances. The psychological impact on American tank crews was severe and well documented. Crews nicknamed Panthers and Tigers, with a mixture of fear and black humor. Reports from Normandy in June and July 1944 painted a grim picture of American tanks being destroyed in numbers that shocked commanders who had believed in the adequacy of their equipment. The American 3-inch gun, mounted on the M10 tank destroyer, had been designed in 1941, when the most dangerous German tank was the Panzer IV with its short-barreled 75mm gun. By the time M10s faced Panthers in Italy and Normandy, they were dangerously outclassed. The 3-inch gun could penetrate a Panther's side armor, but only if American crews could maneuver for flank shots while under fire from a gun that could destroy them frontally at any combat range. This tactical disadvantage cost lives and limited operational effectiveness. The solution had been under development since 1942, but bureaucratic inertia and misplaced confidence in existing weapons had delayed production. In summer of that year, American ordnance engineers began examining the potential of mounting a 90mm gun, originally designed for anti-aircraft use, onto a tank destroyer chassis. The concept was straightforward. The 90mm anti-aircraft gun, developed in the late 1930s, fired a projectile with significantly greater mass and velocity than the 3-inch tank gun. If this weapon could be adapted for anti-tank use and mounted on a mobile platform, it would give American forces a weapon capable of defeating German heavy armor at tactically useful ranges. The technical challenges were substantial. The 90mm gun was significantly larger and heavier than the 3-inch gun. The M10's turret could not accommodate it without extensive redesign. The gun's recoil was powerful enough to require structural reinforcement of the chassis. The ammunition was bulkier and heavier, limiting the number of rounds that could be carried. Each of these problems had to be solved while maintaining the tank destroyer's mobility and reliability. The first prototype, designated T-53, proved unsatisfactory. Rushed into development, it placed the 90mm gun in an open mounting at the rear of an M4 Sherman chassis. Testing revealed serious deficiencies in stability and crew protection. The tank destroyer force, conservative by nature and confident in its existing weapons, objected to the design, and the program seemed likely to die. But combat reports from Tunisia and Italy in 1943 forced a reassessment. American tank destroyers were encountering Tigers and Panthers in increasing numbers. Crews reported frustration and casualties as their 3-inch guns proved inadequate. General Dwight Eisenhower personally intervened after learning that German tanks could engage American armor at ranges where American guns were ineffective. His documented reaction captured command-level alarm at the tactical disadvantage American forces faced. In October 1942, the Ordnance Department tested a new approach. Engineers mounted an experimental 90mm T7 gun into a redesigned turret on an M10 chassis. This configuration proved far more promising. The turret, designed with rounded edges rather than the angular shape of the M10's original turret, could accommodate the larger gun while maintaining structural integrity. Power traverse, absent from the M10, was added to help the crew manage the heavier weapon. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in summer 1943 demonstrated that the weapon system was viable. The 90mm gun, designated M3 in its tank-mounted version, fired a 24-pound armor-piercing round at velocities exceeding 2,600 feet per second. The standard M82 armor-piercing capped shot could penetrate 129mm of armor at 500 yards, enough to threaten a Tiger's frontal hull. More importantly, the gun could engage effectively at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards, allowing American crews to fight at distances where they had previously been helpless. In November 1943, the Tank Destroyer Board recommended the weapon for service. It was standardized in June 1944 as the 90mm gun motor carriage M36. By this time, the Normandy invasion was already underway, and American forces were learning firsthand the cost of inadequate anti-tank weapons. Production began immediately, but the scale of the challenge was daunting. The M36 required components that were not interchangeable with existing tank destroyers. The turret was entirely new. The 90mm gun had to be produced in quantities sufficient to equip hundreds of vehicles, while not disrupting production of the same gun for anti-aircraft use. The Ford GAA V8 engine, which powered the M36, was also needed for Sherman tank production. General Motors, Fisher Tank Division, which had been producing M10 tank destroyers, received orders to convert the final 300 M10A1S under construction to M36 standard. This involved removing the 3-inch gun turrets and replacing them with the new 90mm turrets. The work proceeded through spring and summer 1944, but slowly. Each conversion required skilled labor and careful quality control. The first completed M36S rolled off the production line in April 1944, but combat units would not receive them until late summer. The delay, in retrospect, cost American lives and limited tactical options during the difficult fighting in Normandy. The M36 that finally reached frontline units in September 1944 was an impressive vehicle. Built on the reliable M10A1 chassis, which used the M4 Sherman's drivetrain and suspension, it combined proven automotive components with formidable firepower. The 90mm M3 gun could elevate 16 degrees and depress 8 degrees, providing good flexibility in selecting firing positions. The turret could traverse 360 degrees in 15 seconds using power traverse, far faster than the M10's manual traverse. 47 rounds of 90mm ammunition were carried, 11 in a counterweight at the rear of the turret, and 36 in sponsons low in the hull. The crew of 5 included a commander, gunner, and loader in the turret, with driver and assistant driver in the hull. Like all American tank destroyers, the M36 had an open-topped turret. This design choice, controversial then and debated since, reflected tank destroyer doctrine emphasizing mobility and rapid deployment. The open top reduced weight, improved crew visibility, and simplified production. It also exposed the crew to artillery airbursts, grenades, and small arms fire, a vulnerability that would cost lives in combat. Defensively, the M36 relied on sloped armor rather than thickness. The frontal hull armor was 108mm at 55 degrees, providing reasonable protection against German tank guns at longer ranges. The turret armor was significantly thinner, only 50mm on the front and 32mm on the sides. This made the M36 vulnerable to any German tank gun at close range. Tank destroyer doctrine, which emphasized firing from concealed positions at maximum range and then relocating, attempted to mitigate this vulnerability through tactics rather than armor. The gun itself represented the culmination of American anti-aircraft gun development. The 90mm anti-aircraft gun, which entered service in 1940, had been designed to engage high-altitude bombers at ranges exceeding 10,000 yards. Converting this weapon for anti-tank use required modifications to the ammunition, the addition of a muzzle brake to manage recoil, and changes to the sighting systems. The M76F telescope, used by the gunner, provided magnification adequate for engaging targets at tactical ranges, though German optics were generally superior in clarity and magnification. The ammunition available to M36 crews included several types, each optimized for different targets. The M82 armor-piercing capped round was the primary anti-tank ammunition. This projectile featured a soft steel cap that deformed on impact, helping the hardened penetrator maintain its trajectory through sloped armor rather than ricocheting. The explosive filler inside the projectile would detonate after penetration, causing catastrophic damage inside enemy tanks. Against a Tiger's 100mm frontal hull armor, the M82 could achieve penetration at ranges up to approximately 1,000 yards under favorable conditions. The M71 high-explosive shell provided the M36 with capability against non-armored targets. This round could engage infantry concentrations, fortifications, and light vehicles. Its large bursting charge made it effective for indirect fire support, a role tank destroyers frequently performed when not engaged in anti-tank operations. Later in the war, a specialized high-velocity armor-piercing round, designated T-30E16 and later standardized as M304, became available in very limited quantities. This round used a tungsten carbide penetrator surrounded by a lightweight aluminum body, similar in concept to the HVAP ammunition developed for the 76mm gun. The tungsten round could penetrate 221mm of armor at 500 yards, enough to defeat even a Tiger II's frontal armor at combat ranges. However, tungsten scarcity meant few crews ever received this ammunition, and it played a minimal role in the M36's combat effectiveness. September 1944 saw the first M36s arrive in Europe. They were distributed to tank destroyer battalions that had been operating M10s and M18 Hellcats. The transition required intensive training. Crews needed to learn the characteristics of the 90mm gun, which had different ballistics than the 3-inch gun they had been using. The ammunition was heavier, requiring new loading techniques. The power traverse system needed familiarization. Most critically, commanders had to understand the tactical implications of possessing a weapon that could engage German heavy tanks at ranges where German crews felt secure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The first combat employment occurred in October 1944 during General George Patton's offensive toward Metz. The 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, newly equipped with M36s, supported the attack through difficult terrain against determined German resistance. The engagement at Pufendorf on November 20th became one of the first documented instances of an M36 destroying a Tiger tank, and it would not be the last. German intelligence's failure to detect the M36's deployment proved catastrophic to German tactical planning. Wehrmacht commanders continued to position Panthers and Tigers based on the assumption that American tank guns could not threaten them beyond close range. Panthers were deployed in hull-down positions at 1,500 to 2,000 yards, distances where Sherman 75mm and 76mm guns were ineffective. Tiger crews adopted even more aggressive tactics, sometimes engaging American armor from beyond 2,000 yards, confident in their invulnerability. These tactics, which had been devastatingly effective against Shermans and M10s, proved disastrous when M36s were present. German tank commanders, unable to distinguish M36s from M10s at distance, would engage at ranges they considered safe. The first indication that something was different came when return fire penetrated armor that should have been immune. By the time German crews realized they were facing a new weapon, they were often already under effective fire. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. German tank crews had built their tactical confidence on the certainty of their armor's effectiveness. For over 2 years, Panthers and Tigers had dominated every engagement through superior range and protection. Crews had developed an almost casual contempt for American tank guns, knowing that American tankers had to close to suicidal ranges to have any chance of penetration. The M36 shattered this confidence abruptly and completely. After-action reports from German units in November and December 1944 reflect confusion and alarm. Tank commanders reported being destroyed at ranges they considered safe. Panthers that should have been impervious to frontal fire were penetrated and knocked out. Tigers, the ultimate expression of German armored warfare doctrine, were being destroyed by American vehicles from distances exceeding 1,000 yards. The reports struggled to explain what was happening, with some crews claiming Americans had deployed new heavy tanks, others suggesting British 17-pounder Firefly tanks had been transferred to American units. The truth, that American industry had developed and deployed a tank destroyer mounting a 90mm gun, was more disturbing to German planners than any of these theories. It meant American industrial capacity could respond to tactical problems faster than German industry could counter them. It meant the technological edge Germany had maintained since 1942 was eroding. Most significantly, it meant German armor doctrine, built on the assumption of qualitative superiority, was becoming obsolete. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West, began on December 16, 1944. German forces committed their remaining armoured reserves, including substantial numbers of Panthers and Tigers, to an attack through the Ardennes forest. The offensive caught American forces by surprise, and initial German advances were substantial. However, the commitment of M36-equipped tank destroyer battalions to defensive positions helped blunt the German attack at critical points. The 610th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M36s, played a crucial role in the defense of St. Vith, a critical road junction. German forces attacked with overwhelming numbers, including Tigers and Panthers from heavy tank battalions. The M36s, positioned in prepared defensive positions, engaged German armour at long range, destroying multiple Panthers and damaging Tigers. The battalion suffered heavy casualties, losing 2/3 of its vehicles over 4 days of intense fighting, but the German attack stalled. Other M36-equipped battalions performed similarly in defensive actions across the Ardennes. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion engaged German armour near Bastogne, destroying several Panthers at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards. The 740th Tank Destroyer Battalion fought in defensive positions near Manhay, knocking out multiple German tanks while suffering significant losses to German return fire and artillery. The M36's performance during the Battle of the Bulge validated American ordnance decisions and demonstrated the weapon's capabilities under the most demanding combat conditions. However, it also revealed the vehicle's limitations. The thin turret armour left crews vulnerable to any German tank gun. The open top exposed crews to artillery tree bursts, which were common in the forested Ardennes terrain. Mechanical reliability, generally good, declined in the extreme cold as lubricants thickened and engines struggled to start. By mid-December 1944, only 236 M36s were in service in Europe, a small number compared to the thousands of Shermans and hundreds of M10 and M18 tank destroyers. This scarcity meant M36s could not be present at every engagement where German heavy armour appeared. However, their psychological impact far exceeded their numbers. German tank crews, aware that M36s existed and unable to identify them at distance, approached every engagement with uncertainty. The confidence that had characterized German armoured operations through 1943 and early 1944 was gone, replaced by hesitation and defensive tactics. Intelligence reports from interrogated German prisoners reflected this psychological shift. Panther crews, who had previously engaged American armour aggressively, now reported reluctance to expose themselves at long range. Tiger commanders, accustomed to dominating battles through superior firepower and protection, described feeling vulnerable for the first time. The mere possibility of encountering an M36 forced German crews to adopt more cautious tactics, reducing their combat effectiveness even when no M36s were present. The technical specifications of the 90mm M3 gun deserve examination to understand why it proved so effective against German armour. The gun's barrel measured 53 calibers in length, meaning the barrel was 53 times the bore diameter, or approximately 15 feet long. This length provided the projectile with sufficient acceleration to achieve high muzzle velocity while maintaining accuracy at extended ranges. The standard M82 armour-piercing round exited the barrel at approximately 2,650 feet per second, carrying tremendous kinetic energy. Penetration performance varied with range and angle of impact. At 500 yards, the M82 could penetrate 129 millimeters of armour plate, angled at 30 degrees from vertical. At 1,000 yards, penetration capability decreased to 122 millimeters under the same conditions. Against a Tiger's frontal hull armour, which was 100 millimeters thick but vertical rather than sloped, the M82 provided reliable penetration at ranges up to approximately 1,200 yards under ideal conditions. The Panther presented a more complex challenge. Its frontal glacis plate, 80 millimeters thick but sloped at 55 degrees, created an effective thickness of approximately 140 millimeters. The M82 round struggled against this target, often ricocheting rather than penetrating when striking at oblique angles. However, The Panther's gun mantlet, which was 100 mm of curved cast steel on early models and 120 mm on later variants, was vulnerable to the 90 mm gun at combat ranges. American tank destroyer crews learned to target the mantlet or wait for flank shots rather than engaging the glacis plate directly. The Tiger II, Germany's heaviest production tank, posed the greatest challenge. With 150 mm of frontal armor sloped at 50 degrees, the King Tiger's glacis plate was effectively immune to the M82 round at any practical range. Even the turret front, with 185 mm of armor, could resist standard 90 mm ammunition except at very close range. Only the specialized tungsten core ammunition could reliably penetrate a King Tiger frontally, and this ammunition remained scarce throughout the war. German tank crews who survived encounters with M36s and were subsequently captured provided valuable intelligence about the psychological impact of facing American 90 mm guns. Interrogation reports from late 1944 and early 1945 reveal a consistent pattern. Experienced Panther and Tiger commanders expressed shock at being penetrated at ranges they had considered safe. Many described a fundamental reassessment of their tactical situation after learning American guns could defeat their armor. One Panther commander, captured near Cologne in February 1945, described his experience in detail. His crew had engaged what they believed to be M10 tank destroyers at approximately 1,800 yards, a range where they felt secure. The return fire penetrated their mantlet, killing the gunner and wounding the loader. The crew abandoned the tank, stunned that American guns possessed such capability. The commander reported that after this encounter, his battalion adopted far more cautious tactics, refusing to engage at ranges beyond 1,000 yards and seeking cover more aggressively. Tiger crews expressed even more profound psychological impact. A Tiger commander from Heavy Panzer Battalion 503, interrogated after the Battle of the Bulge, stated that learning about American 90 mm guns fundamentally changed his understanding of the war. For 3 years, he had operated Tigers with confidence in their invulnerability. The knowledge that American weapons could now penetrate his armor frontally at combat ranges destroyed that confidence. He described approaching every engagement with uncertainty, never knowing whether he faced Shermans or the more dangerous tank destroyers. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The production statistics tell their own story about American industrial capacity. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, American factories had produced 2,324 M36 tank destroyers. This total included 1,413 M36s built on M10A1 chassis, 187 M36B1s using M4A3 Sherman chassis, and 724 M36B2s using M10 chassis with different engines. This production occurred while American industry simultaneously built thousands of Sherman tanks, hundreds of M26 Pershing heavy tanks, and maintained production of other armored vehicles. Germany, by contrast, produced only 1,347 Tiger I tanks and 492 Tiger II tanks during the entire war. Panther production, though more substantial at approximately 6,000 units, still paled compared to American output. More significantly, German production was declining sharply by early 1945 as Allied bombing destroyed factories, transportation networks collapsed, and raw materials became unavailable. American production was accelerating, with new factories coming online and production techniques improving. The mathematical reality facing German tank crews by early 1945 was stark. American forces possessed not only numerical superiority in armor, but also with the M36 and the newly arriving M26 Pershing tank, qualitative parity or superiority in anti-tank weapons. German doctrine, which had relied on technical superiority to compensate for numerical inferiority, no longer offered a path to tactical success. This realization spread through German armored units during the winter of 1944 and 1945, corroding morale and combat effectiveness. The engagement ranges documented in M36 combat reports provide insight into actual battlefield employment. While the 90mm gun was theoretically effective at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards, most documented engagements occurred at ranges between 800 and 1,500 yards. This reflected tactical reality rather than weapon limitations. At longer ranges, target identification became difficult, terrain often blocked line of sight, and atmospheric conditions affected accuracy. Most tank destroyer commanders preferred to engage at ranges where first-round hit probability was high, typically between 1,000 and 1,500 yards. However, the capability to engage effectively at longer ranges provided crucial tactical flexibility. German tanks that had previously felt secure at 1,500 to 2,000 yards now had to consider the possibility of effective American return fire. This forced German commanders to either close to ranges where their own vulnerability increased or remain at extreme distances where their own accuracy declined. Either choice reduced German combat effectiveness and surrendered tactical initiative to American forces. The armor penetration achieved by 90mm guns in combat sometimes exceeded theoretical predictions. Examination of knocked-out German tanks revealed penetrations at ranges and angles that ordnance testing suggested should have been marginal. Several factors contributed to this. German armor quality declined during 1944 and 1945 as material shortages forced compromises in steel composition and heat treatment. Welds, always a potential weak point, became more problematic as experienced welders were conscripted and quality control declined. Combat damage, even minor hits that did not penetrate, could create fractures in armor that reduced resistance to subsequent impacts. The M36's combat record in specific engagements demonstrates both its capabilities and limitations. During the fighting along the Ruhr River in November 1944, the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion engaged German armor in open country that favored long-range gunnery. M36S destroyed multiple Panthers at ranges between 1,200 and 1,800 yards, demonstrating the gun's effectiveness against frontal armor at extended distances. However, the battalion also suffered losses when German tanks closed to shorter ranges, where their guns could penetrate the M36's thin turret armor. Near Cologne, in early March 1945, M36S from the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion engaged Panthers in urban terrain. The close-range fighting negated the M36's range advantage, while exposing the vulnerability of its open-topped turret. Several M36S were lost to German tank fire and to Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets fired by infantry from buildings. The battalion inflicted significant casualties on German armor, but learned that the M36, despite its powerful gun, required careful tactical employment to minimize its defensive weaknesses. The crossing of the Rhine River in March 1945 saw M36S employed in both offensive and defensive roles. Tank destroyer battalions provided overwatch for river crossings, engaging any German armor that approached the bridgeheads. Once across the Rhine, M36S advanced with armored columns, destroying German tanks and assault guns that attempted to block American advances. The fluidity of operations during this period suited the M36's combination of mobility and firepower, though mechanical breakdowns increased as units advanced rapidly with limited maintenance time. German tactical responses to the M36 evolved during the final months of the war, though German options were increasingly constrained by fuel shortages, replacement losses, and deteriorating command and control. Some Panther units attempted to employ long-range ambush tactics, positioning tanks at extreme ranges and engaging American armor with first-shot surprise. This approach sometimes succeeded against Shermans, but proved less effective against M36S, which could return fire effectively at these ranges. Other German units adopted extremely cautious tactics, withdrawing at first contact with American armor rather than attempting to identify and engage targets. This preserved German tanks but surrendered tactical initiative and allowed American forces to advance with minimal opposition. Tiger units, traditionally the most aggressive component of German armoured forces, became notably reluctant to engage unless circumstances were overwhelmingly favourable. The psychological impact of knowing they could be destroyed frontally by American guns had fundamentally altered Tiger crew behaviour. The most effective German counter-tactic involved combined arms operations using anti-tank guns, infantry with Panzerfaust rockets, and tanks working together. Anti-tank guns, particularly the 88mm Pak-43, could destroy M36s at extended ranges while being harder to spot than tanks. Infantry with Panzerfausts posed a severe threat in close terrain, where the M36's open top and thin armour made it vulnerable. However, organising such combined arms defences required resources, coordination, and time that German forces increasingly lacked during the chaotic retreat across Germany in spring 1945. The German perspective on American 90mm guns extended beyond tactical considerations to strategic implications. German ordnance officers who examined, captured, or destroyed M36s after the war expressed professional respect for the weapon system's engineering. The gun mounting was robust, the traverse system effective, and the ammunition well designed. More significantly, they recognized that American industry had solved the complex problem of adapting an anti-aircraft gun for anti-tank use while maintaining high production rates. Germany had attempted similar conversions with limited success. The 88mm flak guns that equipped Tigers had originally been anti-aircraft weapons, but adapting them for tank use had required extensive modifications and custom engineering. The process was slow and expensive, limiting Tiger production to a few hundred units per year at peak. American industry had achieved a similar technical feat with the 90mm gun, but at a scale and speed German industry could not match. This industrial capacity gap, more than any specific weapon system, explained American victory. The ammunition logistics for M36 operations reveal another dimension of American industrial superiority. Each M36 carried 47 rounds of 90mm ammunition, enough for sustained combat, but requiring regular resupply. American logistics networks, developed over 3 years of global warfare, efficiently delivered ammunition to frontline units even during rapid advances. Supply convoys, depots, and maintenance facilities ensured M36s remained combat effective despite heavy expenditure of ammunition. German logistics, by contrast, had collapsed by early 1945. Fuel shortages immobilized tanks that were mechanically sound. Ammunition resupply was irregular at best. Spare parts were unavailable, forcing crews to cannibalize disabled vehicles to keep others operational. Tigers and Panthers that should have been formidable opponents sat abandoned due to empty fuel tanks or minor mechanical failures that could not be repaired. The M36's combat effectiveness derived not just from its gun, but from the entire logistics system that kept it supplied, fueled, and maintained. The comparison between M36 and Tiger capabilities reveals interesting technical and tactical insights. The Tiger I's 88mm KUK-36 gun could penetrate 138mm of armour at 1,000 yards using standard ammunition, slightly better than the M36's 122mm at the same range. However, the Tiger's significantly thicker armour, particularly the 100mm frontal hull and turret, provided better protection than the M36's maximum of 108mm on the glacis plate. In a hypothetical one-on-one engagement at medium range, the Tiger possessed advantages in protection and somewhat better gun performance. However, actual combat rarely consisted of one-on-one duels. American doctrine emphasized combined arms coordination, with tank destroyers supported by artillery, air power, and infantry. The M36's mobility, at 42 km per hour maximum road speed, exceeded the Tiger's 38 km per hour, allowing American forces to choose engagement ranges and positions. Most critically, American crews could expect rapid support if engaged, while German tanks operated increasingly isolated as command structures collapsed. The question of effective range deserves careful examination. The title reference to 2,000 yards represents the theoretical maximum effective range rather than typical engagement distance. At 2,000 yards, approximately 1,830 meters, the M36's 90mm gun retained enough velocity to penetrate Tiger armor under ideal conditions with perfect shot placement. However, practical factors limited actual combat effectiveness at such ranges. Target identification at 2,000 yards required excellent optics and favorable visibility. Atmospheric conditions, including heat shimmer, humidity, and battlefield smoke, often degraded visibility beyond 1,500 yards. The probability of a first-round hit declined significantly beyond 1,500 yards due to trajectory drop, wind drift, and the inherent accuracy limitations of the gun and sighting system. While documented instances exist of M36s engaging German armor beyond 2,000 yards, these were exceptional rather than typical. The psychological impact of possessing this theoretical capability mattered more than the actual frequency of extreme-range engagements. German tank crews knew American 90mm guns could engage them at distances where they had previously felt secure. This knowledge forced German crews to remain alert and defensive even at extended ranges, increasing stress and reducing the confidence that had characterized German armored operations through 1943. The uncertainty, not knowing at what range they might face effective fire, proved as damaging to German effectiveness as actual combat losses. The terminal phase of the war in Europe, from April through early May 1945, saw German resistance collapsing across all fronts. Armoured units that still possessed operational tanks often chose withdrawal or surrender over continued fighting. M36 equipped tank destroyer battalions advancing across Germany encountered decreasing resistance from German armour, not because German tanks had been destroyed, but because crews abandoned vehicles and commanders refused to commit remaining armour to hopeless defensive battles. The contrast with the Eastern Front during the same period is instructive. German tank units facing Soviet forces continued fighting with determination despite overwhelming odds, inflicting significant casualties on Soviet armour. The different behaviour on the two fronts reflected not just military calculations but psychological factors. On the Eastern Front, German crews believed, with some justification, that surrender meant death or brutal captivity. In the West, surrender to American forces offered survival. The knowledge that continued resistance was militarily futile, combined with the prospect of reasonable treatment in American captivity, made continued fighting seem pointless. The arrival of M26 Pershing Heavy tanks in February 1945 further complicated the German situation. The Pershing mounted the same 90mm gun as the M36, but in a fully armoured, enclosed turret on a tank chassis. While only a few dozen Pershings saw combat before Germany's surrender, their existence demonstrated that American 90mm gun technology was being deployed across multiple platforms. German crews could no longer assume that only tank destroyers posed the threat of effective long-range fire. The statistical analysis of M36 combat effectiveness is complicated by incomplete record. November 20th, 1944. A frozen road near Pfaffendorf, Germany. Through the periscope of his M36 tank destroyer, Sergeant Robert Early watched a Tiger tank materialize from behind the rubble of a farm building, its massive silhouette unmistakable even in the grey afternoon light. For months, American tank crews had learned to fear this shape. The Tiger's 88mm gun could destroy their Shermans from distances where return fire was futile. But Early's vehicle was different. Mounted in the open-topped turret behind him was a 90mm gun, a weapon German intelligence had failed to detect and German tankers had never encountered. In exactly 14 seconds, the crew of that Tiger would discover that American industrial capacity had produced something capable of challenging their supremacy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Tiger commander, peering through his optics, likely saw what appeared to be another American tank destroyer. perhaps an M10 with its familiar 3-inch gun, a weapon his frontal armor could defeat at any reasonable range. German doctrine, refined through 3 years of combat, emphasized engaging American armor at maximum distance. The Tiger's advantages in armor protection and gun range made close engagement unnecessary and tactically wasteful. This Tiger crew followed that doctrine, halting at approximately 1,200 yards to acquire their target properly. It was a fatal miscalculation. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Early's gunner centered the crosshairs on the Tiger's hull, accounting for the distance and the slight wind. The 90mm gun fired with a distinctive crack that differed from the sharper report of the Sherman's 76mm. The armor-piercing round, traveling at over 2,800 feet per second, crossed the distance in less than 2 seconds. German crews had grown accustomed to watching American shells bounce off their frontal armor or shatter against it. This round did not bounce. The projectile struck the Tiger's lower hull, punching through 100 millimeters of armor plate and detonating inside the crew compartment. The Tiger shuddered, smoke began pouring from hatches, and within moments the crew was bailing